Carl Gerer is one of the most famous executioners in German history. This is probably because of his role in dispatching serial murderer Peter Kürten, amongst others. Carl Gerer was born in Magdeburg on the 22nd of February 1868 as the child of the railway worker and porter Heinrich Gröpler and his wife Auguste, née Anton. He first became a musician, then worked as a postal worker for 5 years. Groepler learned how to be a horse butcher and ran the AG steam laundry in Magdeburg. He was described as being broad-shouldered, a strong figure with a reddish mustache and a short military haircut. The laundry didn't bring in enough money, so Groepler looked for additional income. A part-time job in assisting in chopping off people's heads became available. He was initially the main assistant to the Prussian executioner Lorenz Schwietz. When the Prussian executioner Alwin Engelhardt was dismissed without notice because of inconsistencies in his accounts in 1906, Groepler took over his duties. Prussian law stated that executions were to be carried out by beheading, but it did not state how this beheading was to be done. There were two methods, either use of the guillotine or the hand axe. Carl Gerer used both methods. The German word for guillotine is Fallbeil, that is, falling hatchet, and sometimes the word is used in English also. The guillotine was introduced from France during Napoleonic times in various German states. The German version was built primarily of metal instead of wood. It used heavier blades than the French predecessor. Multiple executions could be conducted faster thanks to a more efficient blade recovery system. Those deemed likely to struggle were backed slowly into the device from behind a curtain to prevent them from seeing it prior to the execution. A metal screen covered the blade in order to conceal it from the sight of the condemned. Nazi Germany used the guillotine between 1933 and 1945 to execute at least 16,500 prisoners, 10,000 of them in 1944 and 1945 alone. The guillotine was last used in West Germany in 1949 in the execution of Richard Schuh and was last used in East Germany in 1966 in the execution of Horst Fischer. I've looked at a number of executions that took place in Germany, particularly Nazi Germany, by beheading with an axe. There are a lot of stories of what can only be described as botched executions in early modern England, where it was customary for the condemned to pay the executioner to do a good job. Whereas I have never heard of any refunds being made for doing a bad job, there are some pretty gruesome stories. Just to give one example of many, the Duke of Monmouth was beheaded by Jack Ketch on the 15th of July 1685 at Tower Hill in London. Before laying his head on the block, Monmouth specifically requested Ketch finish him off with one blow, saying he'd mauled others before. Ketch was noted for not being particularly good at his job, and it took 5, 7 or 8 blows to kill the Duke. Sources differ, and some even say that the executioner had to use a knife to sever the Duke's head. All I can say is that I hope the Duke got his money back. I shall spare you the details of such cases, of which there are many, but I have found only one case where a second blow of the axe was required in Germany. I am unable to explain why this happened. Why were German executioners so good and those in England who had far more practice at what they were doing so bad? In April 1924, Groepler signed a contract that made him the de facto sole executioner in northern Germany. The death sentence was used sparingly in the Weimar Republic, and, as we shall see following one scandal, it might have been abolished altogether. In addition to a monthly retainer of 136 gold marks per month, Groepler received a flat rate of 60 gold marks for himself and 50 gold marks for each of his assistants for each execution. This form of payment for this part-time job was common in other countries, including the United Kingdom. On the 15th of April 1925, Carl Gerer executed serial killer Fritz Hamann Harman is believed to have killed 27 boys and young men between September 1918 and June 1924. On the 15th of February 1926, Groepler executed the farm worker Josef Jakubowski with an axe in the Neustrelitz State Institution. Josef Jakubowski was sentenced on very flimsy evidence, and it later transpired that he was almost certainly innocent. He was a Polish farm worker who had gone to live in Germany during World War I. At the time, it was said to be racism and that no German would have received the death sentence based on the evidence presented at trial. This led to a discussion about the abolition of the death penalty. The number of executions decreased, and therefore, whereas Groepler would have continued to receive his monthly retainer, he would not have got the bounty for each execution. On the 2nd of July 1931, the 48-year-old serial killer Peter Kürten was executed by Carl Gerer in the Cologne prison Klingelpütz with a guillotine. This man has been described as the vampire of Dusseldorf or the Dusseldorf Ripper. At least 3 films have been made about him, the first of which was made as early as 1931. It was the Fritz Lang production M, which starred Peter Lorre, who was later to become famous starring in The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca. The guillotine that was sent from Magdeburg had not been used for 5 years, so it might not have been in the best condition. Obviously, it had to be transported in sections, and Groepler had to put it together. There was international interest in the case, and Time quoted on the 13th of July 1931, Herr Groepler, a stolid individual whose profession forces him to lead a rather unsocial existence, left his cosy home in Magdeburg last week with a bag of tools and a coil of new rope. He took the train to the Prussian state prison at Klingelpütz near Cologne. In the prison yard, he disappeared into a dusty, dilapidated shed. Prisoners, tense in their cells, heard him hammering and filing metal all day long. Kürten had gained notoriety by murdering a large number of young girls and ladies, gaining sexual satisfaction as their blood fell to the ground, and also by having sexual satisfaction in revisiting the locations of his murders. Just before he was about to be executed, he asked, when his head was chopped off, if he'd still be able to hear and see the blood falling to the ground, as that would be the greatest joy of all. When Hitler came to power in January 1933, the amount of death sentences reached record levels. As early as the 19th of February 1933, Groepler renewed his annual contract with a salary of 1,500 Reichsmarks per year and a flat rate of 50 Reichsmarks per execution. Although not yet a party member, he appears to have appreciated all the extra cash that he got from the new rulers. He gave the Hitler salute and was asked not to do this. On the 12th of April 1933, Groepler beheaded the 25-year-old murderer Albert Klüger with an axe in what is today the car park of the district court in Zwickau. Then it was the courtyard of the court. In May 1934, a trial was held of a number of communists who had resorted to armed resistance to the Nazis. This became known as the Red Marine Trial, and those implicated had belonged to an organization based around the ports along the coast from Bremen to Königsberg, including in the free city of Danzig. Some of them had been Soviet agents. The trial ended with 9 death sentences, including one for Johann Wilhelm Jasper. At least 4 of the condemned were executed by Groepler. On the 18th of February 1935, Baroness Benita von Falkenhayn and her friend Renate von Natzmer were executed in Berlin-Plötzensee after having been sentenced for treason by the People's Court. The execution caused widespread horror in the foreign press and ultimately led to the Justice Ministry insisting that guillotines be made standard throughout the Reich. Even the head of the Foreign Press Office, and early Hitler supporter from Munich, Ernst Heffenstein, criticized this execution because, due to its brutality, it had resulted in serious damage to German cultural reputation throughout the world that could hardly be repaired in the foreseeable future, and a renewed considerable loss of sympathy for Germany. Here is a description of the executions. On the 13th of February 1935, the first execution of the day took place. The executioner, Carl Gerer, severed the head of Benita von Halkenhayn with one stroke of his axe. About 20 minutes later, a second woman was led into the courtyard of the Plötzensee Penitentiary. The dreaded wooden scaffold where beheadings were commonplace was located in the centre of the courtyard and served as the primary place of execution in Berlin. The prosecutor of the German Reich, Jones, dressed in a cardinal red robe, recited the final verdict. I have to inform you, Renata von Natzmer, that your petition for clemency has been denied and that the verdict of the court, which sentenced you to death for espionage for a foreign country and high treason, will now be executed. I am handing you over to the executioner. Held up by the strong arms of the executioner's henchmen, Renata stood in a puddle of her own urine with an indescribable look of fear in her eyes. A priest began to lead those in the courtyard in reciting the Lord's Prayer. The prayer was interrupted by the loud noise of the executioner's henchmen. Two muscular henchmen lifted Renata by her arms, which were shackled behind her back. They forcibly dragged her into a kneeling position in front of the wooden scaffold and placed her head on the chopping block. Groepler's axe was in position over Renata's neck, and before the priest could say Amen, the executioner's axe swiftly severed Renata's head from her torso. Everyone watched in horror as her head rolled to the floor. On the 23rd of May 1936, Groepler executed Adolf Gustav Seefeld by guillotine in Schwerin. Seefeld had gone on a killing spree lasting at least 2 years from 1933, when he was already 63 years old. The prosecution believed that he may have killed as many as 100 toddlers and small boys. His trial was attended by Nazi Gauleiter Friedrich Karl Heinrich August Hildebrand, who himself was to face the death penalty 12 years later. As a traditionally hired executioner, Groepler wore a white shirt, waistcoat and tails at executions. The employment contract of 1928 obliged him to wear a double-breasted jacket, somewhat similar to what 19th century soldiers wore. Groepler disliked it because, in his opinion, it restricted the freedom of movement of his arms. With the new contract in 1933, he returned to tails, which in turn drew criticism from the Reich Ministry of Justice, which desired a more modern appearance. On the 17th of June 1935, Groepler explained to the ministry that a blood-stained tunic did not correspond to the dignity to be preserved, but that the tails covered the bloodstains on the shirt sleeves. At the same time, he pleaded against the guillotine because the axe was quicker and more stealthy. However, during an execution in October 1936, he missed the middle of the neck and hit above the hairline. It seems as though he had been drinking alcohol before the execution, and it's this execution, which is the only one that I know of where an axe was used, which was botched, or at least it required a second stroke. After a career of more than 30 years with at least 144 executions, he retired in 1937. He claimed that he could not live off the annual retainer of around 1,500 Reichsmarks, which was then around $600 per year. Of course, this was just a part-time job, and I think the reason for his retirement was something else. The execution of Peter Kürten had got him international fame. He therefore accepted a well-paid job from the radio in New York to tell his life story. The Justice Department in the Third Reich ordered him not to do this. He was replaced by his assistant Ernst Reindl, who owned a knacker's yard in Gommen near Magdeburg, whose story you will find in another video. In 1945, Gröpler was arrested by the Soviet military at his home in Magdeburg. The arrest was probably done as a result of the execution of the Red Marine Communists, which he'd carried out in 1934 in Hamburg. The Communists had not forgotten him. Other Justice Ministry executions were in turn executed by the Soviets, but Gröpler did not live long enough. Possibly as a result of mistreatment and because of his age, he died in custody on the 30th of January 1946. The building you see here is that of the NKVD in Magdeburg. I don't know if Gröpler was brought here, but I do know of one person who was brought here. That was Adolf Hitler, or rather, what was left of the remains of Hitler. The body of Hitler remained here until April 1970, when it was dug up, burned again, then dumped over the side of a bridge just outside of the city of Magdeburg. I've done a separate video on what happened to the remains of Hitler, which you can see on this channel. I hope you found that interesting. I upload every Friday at 2000 hours my time. I'm based in Poland and in Germany, so if you're somewhere else, it'll be at a different time. My specialization is in Third Reich, on Nazi Germany, and so if this is the sort of thing that interests you, then you'll want to subscribe. I also do live chats, and which gives you the opportunity in real time to communicate not only with me but with other viewers as well. So if you subscribe, then you'll know when I'm uploading. I upload around, I would say around 120 videos a year, something along those lines approximately. Depends what I'm feeling like. But for the moment, from me, thank you very much for listening, and all the best for now.